Okay, so Bezras Hashem, we're continuing with our weekly shirim on entering the Sea of Wisdom based on the weekly Torah from the Gilyon of the Goyen and the Tzaddik Rav Yitzchak Maya Morgenstern Shlita. And tonight, what we're going to be doing is something I don't think that we've done before. We're actually going to be looking at two pieces, and really it's one piece, but this piece is supported by another piece that comes from elsewhere. And in addition to the two pieces that speak together in a certain way, there's also this remarkable hashkacha pratis for me that what they started sending out is the Rebbe Shir on Eitz Chaim. Just incredible amounts of Torah are flowing forth from the Yam HaChachma at this point. It's because there are people who are writing more and more. Different Talmidim are deciding to write down different elements of the Rebbe's Torah. So we're finding more and more. And right now what they're doing is they're writing and sending out weekly unedited shirim from Eitz Chaim that the Rebbe is going through all the Meforshim and the Pilpul and the Amkus, and then through the lens of Chassidus and the Darchei HaYichud of the Rashash and the Taras Chacham. But what the Rebbe reached this week in his shirim on Eitz Chaim is a sugya that is perhaps the sugya that is most dear to my heart, which is the Sveikos of Atik, the questions of the Sveikos of Reshad Lois Yada. And so there's that element that the Rebbe was talking about this in the middle of the week, and they have the shir from that. And then this Nakuda that we're going to look at is really from the Daf Yomi shirim that the Rebbe was giving on Rosh Hashanah. And then this Nakuda is also supported by the fact, typically they only quote the De'ei Chochma L'Nafshecha, the Shalosh Shudas Drasha, from the year before. So L'Dugma, we're now in Tafshin Pei Beis. So typically on Parshas Vayetze, Tafshin Pei Beis, they would publish Parshas Vayetze from Tafshin Pei Aleph, because Rebbe Kiva Shlita writes down the Drasha by Shalosh Shudas itself. And I think we've discussed before in this Nakuda V'Nes, where he hears beyond audible hearing to write down everything, and then he adds all the footnotes and expands it and clarifies it with the Rebbe, and then it gets printed basically a year later. But this week, they gave us a drasha from Pashas Vayetze, Tafshin Ayin Dalid. Tafshin Ayin Dalid. And this drasha of Tafshin Ayin Dalid by Pashas Vayetze also goes into a sugya of Safek and Vadai with regards to Yaakov and Leah and Rachel that Mamish supports exactly what we're going to be looking at. So because the drushos that are written based on the Shas and the Daf Yomi are less developed than Nishmas and Chadasin, so we'll just, for a word of introduction, what the Rebbe is coming to ask, based on a steer in the Gemara that seems to be machriya in a situation where there's a suffix derabanan, the Gemara is machriya l'chumra. And the Rebbe uses that as an opportunity to ask why. Because b'derech klal we say that suffix derabanan l'kula. And so after explaining why this particular sugya is really l'chumra, because it was a suffix that was capable of being clarified, the Rebbe goes on to discuss the general klal that in general we say that a suffix derabanan is l'kula, and the Rebbe wants to explain why a suffix derabanan is l'kula. In order to properly understand what the Rebbe is going to be saying, we have to understand what Reishad Lois Yada means. And now again, Reishad Lois Yada, typically referred to as Radla, Reish Dalid, Lamed, Chupchik Aleph, is the Rosh Tevos that is typically used in the Svarim. Radla represents the apex of the Arizal system. It's the Keser of the Keser. It's the Gar of Atik, the Keser of the highest parts of imaginable. And it's also representative of the ceiling point at which the system, according to our comprehension or our capacity to comprehend, reaches its limit, at which point this concept of Radla, Resha de Lo Isyada, the unknowable and unknown head that can't be known, which is there to remind us that Tachlis Hayadiyah Shalei Neda, like Rabbi Nachman quotes all the time, that the apex of knowledge is to come to a place of not knowing. But we see it explicit in the Arizal that the highest system, the highest point in the system is Reshad Lois Yada. And even though Reshad Lois Yada is still a keser within the system of the Partsufim, and it's considered a gar da'atik, whatever that means, Bezras Hashem will be able to go through all of the writings to understand what this actually means. But suffice it to say that the gar of Atik is such a lofty concept that the Gra and his parish on Safeditz News, as well as the Arizal and Mavei Sharim, both point out that the concept of Radla, because of its loftiness, can also borrow the name or Ein Sof. It can be nechshav as literally the beginning point of our capacity to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with us in this world. Now, obviously, it's axiomatic to any beginner or novice or expert in the writings of the Arizal and the Mekubalim and the Tzaddikim, that Or Ein Sof is not Hakadosh Baruch Hu b'chavodo u'v'atzmo chas v'shalom, a notion that would be tantamount to heresy to claim that the two are equal with one another. But Or Ein Sof, as the Tzaddikim point out, as the Leshem makes very clear, and the Rebbe makes as clear as anybody has ever done in history, Or Ein Sof is still just a giloi klape, the atzmuso of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is not even nichnas into the hasaga of our ability to grasp it, even by way of negation. So Or Ein Sof is the first giloi that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals in this world. Nevertheless, the concept of Radla is synonymous on a certain level and a relative positioning with the concept of Or Ein Sof. Now, with that being said, we encounter a profound kind of dizzying concept that when Rav Chaim Vital is writing about Reisha Lois Yada in the writings of Eitz Chaim and Eitz Chaim and all of the writings of the Arizal, what we encounter are sveikos. We encounter that Rav Chaim Vital was receiving and clarifying the teachings that he receives from his Rebbe, the Arizal, in the 2.5 years that the Arizal spent teaching face-to-face in Sfas after arriving from Mitzrayim prior to his untimely death, so to speak, which would have, if he was zoicha to live long enough, he would have, as we know from the Kamelech, brought about Mashiach and brought about Mashiach ben Yosef and all of the Giluyim of Sodus Torah within Niglas Torah. But in that short time that we were zocha to the Giluyim of the Arizal would sit with Rav Chaim Vital, and Rav Chaim Vital was the one who was given permission to record and to express and to share the Torah. And b'derech klal in Eitz Chaim, what we have is clarification. Rav Chaim Vital is stating the halachos, the laws of reality as he received them from his teacher, the Arizal, who received them from Eliyahu Navi in the line of the Tzadikei Hadoros. But when it comes to Shar Atik, when it comes to the sugya of Reisha Lois Yada, we find something remarkable that Rav Chaim Vital doesn't exactly remember what he heard from his Rebbe, the Arizal, in terms of the particularities of Reisha Lois Yada, the technicalities that go into the sugya of Rada. Like any other sugya, it has prate pratim that give birth to it, and there's sveikos there. And so it would have been enough if Rav Chaim Vital had just said, I don't remember, I don't fully understand, these are the sveikos, here you have it. But Rav Chaim Vital writes at the end of Shar Atik, when discussing the sveikos of Radla, is that v'yesh oid sveikos v'goy v'loy zachisi b'hem. And there are other sveikos that I've not even merited. And all of the Meforshim, the Ramchal, the Leshem, in particular the Ramchal points this out, as is known in Klach Pesach Chachma by Pesach Chavdalid, Toameh Chaim Zachu, Rav Menachem Mendel of Shklov. They all, Kuli Amalo Pligi, they all say, what do you mean, Lo Zachu Behem? Safek is a bad thing. Safek is a difficult thing. Safek means a lack of clarity. So what do you mean that you weren't Zoicha to these Sveikos? You should just tell us there's sveikos. Why do you want to be zoichet to more sveikos? And not only that, Rav Chaim Vital continues and he says that these sveikos are in the darga of what the Nevuah and Yeshaya says, the Hespia b'tzachtzachais nafshecha, that I will satisfy you in the thirst of your soul. And all of the Meforshim and the Ramchal points out, and the Rebbe quotes this in his shir on Sveikos Atik, and the Rebbe has a long mimer in Yam HaChachma Tafshin Ayin on Sveikos Radla titled the Hespia b'tzachtzachais nafshecha. What the Rebbe points out, based on the Ramchal, is that be'emes, the sveikos at the Darg of Radla, they're not sveikos as we typically understand doubt. It's not a doubt as to what is the reality in a given situation, A or B. Generally speaking, when we talk about doubt, something is either A or B, and we simply don't know whether it's A or B because we lack the proper clarification or hachra'a of whether it was b'metzias A or B. It wasn't A and B at once, it was A or B. We just lack the prerequisite evidence to give us a definitive answer as to what the actual reality was. That's a suffix down here. Those are the sveikos that we clarify in the Torah, the sveikos of Tumma and Tahara v'chulei. But there's a higher level, something called suffix be'etzim, or din suffix. It's a metzius of suffix, where it's not that it's A or B. It's A and B at the very same moment, and because both are present at once in a simultaneous fashion, we don't have the capacity to be machriya which it is, because when I look at it as A, it appears to be B. When I look at it as B, it appears to be A. And it runs back and forth, ratza v'shoiv kamare habazek. It's moving simultaneously between A and B, because at this darga of keser, at this lofty level of Or Ein Sof, shrei hafachim b'noisa echad, two things can operate at once, and everything is there. Almost like the quantum uncertainty principle, that when I look at something as an electron, it manifests as an electron, even though it can be the opposite of an electron. And when I look at it as something as the opposite of an electron, it can look like the opposite, that both are there. Everything is capable of manifesting at that moment, and that's the din of suffix. It's not a suffix because of a lack of knowledge, it's a suffix because everything is there. And at this darga of Sveikos Deradla, the highest level of the system, we come to recognize that ultimately it's a suffix because we as human beings can't ever fully grasp exactly how it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being manhig the world. Ein v'yesh, yesh ve'ein, memale kalaman, soivev kalaman, ani ve'ayin, it's all there b'vas achas. And when a person reaches that level of Reishad Loas Yada, the not knowing becomes the fundamental experience of grasping emunah. Because in the end of the day, Tachlis Hayadiyah Shalei Neda, and at that darga of Radla, at that darga of we no longer know the difference between Ur Haman and Baruch Mordechai, where both become representative of the same unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at that place it's a din of suffix, but it's a suffix de Kedusha. It's a sipuk, as the tzaddikim point out, that suffix and sipuk, doubt and satisfaction, share the same etymological root. And so we have to understand this is a very small hakdama to the concepts of the Sveikos of Reish Lois Yada. It represents the inevitable point at which we encounter the collapse of knowledge in the face of our incapacity to behold all opposites and all manifestations of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which gives way to that which always remains in spite of everything, which is the Nekuda of Emunah. And this, the Rebbe tells us, is what we're going to have to understand when it comes to the sugya of Safek Derabanan Lakula. Because once we have the sugya of Radla explained to us, the next thing we have to understand, which is what the Rebbe comes and is Machadesh, not Machadesh Chas v'Shalom, it's Mefurish in the Ari and the Meforshim, but nobody like the Rebbe came to talk about this in this world. And he should continue talking about it at Me'ah v'Esrim Shana, Me'ah v'Shmainim Shana until Vias HaMashiach. But Malchus, the lowest manifestation of experience in this world, the suffix down here, the ulai, the questions that we have in the space of Malchus, which is darkness, which is the opposite of Reishad Lois Yada, be'emes Malchus is gonuz b'Reishad Lois Yada. If we want to understand the true lofty source of that which we experience down here on a darga of Malchus, be'emes, it's rooted all the way up in Reishad Lois Yada, Malchus hagnuza baradla, as the Rebbe points out over and over and over again. The bechina of Evan ma'asu habanim, the Evan is the bechina of Ben, it's the bechina of Malchus, it's that stone that is despised, it's David Malka Mashiach. It's despised down here, but be'emes, it's Haisel Rosh Pina, it's rooted in the loftiest place of Seif Masav Machshav Tchila. And that be'emes, when we contemplate Malchus down here in its lowly state and all of its brokenness and confusion and doubts and existential quandaries, what we need to do is bring it back up to the doubts of Reishad Lois Yada to realize that this iyadiyah, this inability to know anything, is in truth rooted in the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light and greatness is so large that all we can ever do is have emunah at the end of the day. And so what the Rebbe is going to tell us is that Safek Derabanan Lakula, the sugya of Derabanan, the sugya of Derabanan, of Hilchos Derabanan, of Torah Shabbal Peh, is a bechina of Malchus. It's a bechina of Chazal schlepping around this world trying to be mevayer, sveikos, and halacha of tahor, or tameh, or kosher, or pasul, or asur, or mutter. And all of those sveikos of the Torah, of the Eitz Hadas, Tevera, and all of the erbuvia that comes about in the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 elements of the Mishnah, where it's Safek and Vadai, that all of those sveikos that are rooted in the world of the Derabanan, which is the Darg of Malchus down here, are be'emes lakula because they're rooted in the loftiest place of Radla, where everything is simplified and everything is purified and everything is beautiful. So that when we contemplate the Sveikos that we encounter down here in the Bechina of Sveikos Derabanan, when you contemplate the true source of that inability to know anything and you bring it back up to that place of Reishad Loas Yada, you come to recognize that Be'emes Safek Derabanan Lakula, that at that lofty place of Radla, it's only Lakula. Leis Smaila Bahayatika, there's no din there, there's no negation there, there's no negativity, everything is good, everything is Kadosh and Tahar, Kula Mahuvim, and everything is Lakula. And that's what the Rebbe is going to be masber now when he says as follows. The bir hapnimi bedin zeh shel safek derabanan lakula, and the inner explanation of this sugya, which is the safek derabanan lakula, and as the Rebbe says, v'dafka b'safek she'ef shar levayra, that's going on the sugya in Rosh Hashanah. Hu al pi hayadua, it's based on that which is known, shesviras hamalchus shayrasha genuza b'reishad lois yada, that in truth the svira of malchus, the lowest expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light in this world, is rooted and concealed within the highest expression, which is radla, which is reishad lois yada, which means reishad lois yada shuhu makom hagavoa biyoter b'hakeser, which is the loftiest place in the Darga of Keser, the Darga of the Gar of Atik, the Keser of Keser, the Gimel Rishon, the Keser Chachama and Bina of the highest Darga of Keser. The Sviras HaMalchus, and the lowest possible expression of Sviras HaMalchus, is the aspect of the mitzvahs derabanan, v'yadua b'Kabbalah shekol mitzvahs derabanan keshurim l'Sviras HaMalchus. All of the mitzvahs, and the Rebbe adds over here a technicality that it's makusher to the Darga of Yaakov and Rachel, and that's the point where the Rebbe's drasha in Tafshin Ayin Daled towards the end becomes just this remarkable collusion of these ideas. But suffice it to say that the Derabanan, our experience down here in the world of Torah Sheba'al Peh, the world of Malchus, that's where we find these mitzvahs Derabanan. They're all makusher to the sphere of Malchus, because the mitzvahs Deoraisa are makusher to a higher parts of which is Zer Anpin. V'im kein kol safek b'mitzvah Derabanan hu lekula. And therefore, every suffix and a mitzvah that is rooted in Malchus, that is rooted in Rabbanan, is lakula. Kula means sweetening it. Kula means making it simpler. Kula means seeing the good in it. Hayos, why? She'inyan hasafek kubelchinas iyediya. Because the suffix in truth is the element of not knowing. I don't know. I can't be machriya. I'm caught up in doubt. I'm left in the dark. But at that point, mitgala al yedei ha'iyediya ha'shayrish shekala mitzvahs derabanan shu ha'makom deradla. But it's specifically in that lack of knowledge and the inability to know, being caught up in that suffix, that we uncover the true source of Malchus, the true source of mitzvahs derabanan, of the Eitz Hadas Tovera, which is the makom of Radha, which is Reshad Loas Yada. Sha'al Yedei has suffix sheyesh b'mitzvahs derabanan, that through the suffix that a person encounters in mitzvahs derabanan in this world, misgala ha'shoyra shel ha'mitzvah derabanan shuhu b'Radla. At that point, the person uncovers the true source of all sveikos, which is the shayresh and Reshad Loas Yada, the sveikos of Atik. The imkain suffix derabanan lakula, and therefore, when I encounter the source of the suffix derabanan of the sveikos in this world of Malchus, it's memela going to be lakula. It's memela going to be seen through chesed. Sheheyoisha shayresh derabanan hu baharadla. That because the mitzvahs derabanan, which is representative of this worldliness in Torah Sheba'al Peh, and the b'mach sheichim hoshivani kamase olam zu Talmud Bavli, that the Talmud Bavli, the bechina of the Rabbanan, is rooted in the darkness of exile, as all the tzaddikim point out by Hanukkah. It's specifically there that we uncover have a leis smoila b'hayatika. There's no din there. There's no constriction there. There's no chumrah there. There's only light. There's only chesed. V'sham have a hakol lakula, and everything is easy there, and everything is revealed to have been the easiest way possible. V'zehu rak b'safek gamor, and this is only in a safek gamor, like we said before. Mashein kein b'safek shefshar b'seder. What the Rebbe is saying over here is just an essential nakuda, that the sveikos that we find ourselves caught up in down here, those existential sveikos that make us afraid, that emanate from Torah Sheba'al Peh, the bechina of me'emasai koru neshama ba'arvis. From when do I cry out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the darkness of night? Me'emasai, as the tzaddikim tell us, not only me'emasai from when, but by me'emasi, from my fear. It's specifically those sveikos that lead us to the recognition that, sure, I don't know anything, but my not knowing is mamish rooted in the highest place possible at the darga of Reish Loas Yada. This is the sugya, in my humble opinion, that the Rebbe comes to be masbir more and more than any tzaddik before him and any tzaddik after him. This is the sugya of Radla, of Aniva Ayin Bevasachas, of the Tosefes Kishat, of his klalus, of the Tnua, his chadshis, Besoicha Tainu Katamidi, which is the gilui that be'emes, the suffix is higher than vaday in the end of the day. Be'ezus Hashem, we should be zoichet to continue to taste of the tzaddik's waters that flow from Gan Eden, which is giving us a taste of Reish Loas Yada in this world, to taste as we still sit in Malchus, to taste the Or of Mashiach, to realize that the sveikos that we sit in are be'emes mushrish in the highest places imaginable.